Hi, everyone. So excited to be here for another interesting and worthwhile live stream, let's hope. I'm being joined today by Dave Snell. He should be signing on at any moment. And our word of the day is collaboration. Hopefully, there's some interest in commenting. Chat's wide open. Love to hear who's listening, even if it's just your name and where you're from. And if you have any comments on collaboration, we're glad to entertain them and really direct our conversation to make us as relevant as possible. So, looking forward to comments in the meantime. My initial thoughts on collaboration are basically working together with someone or someone's else, if that's a word, to build uh, opportunities that maybe could have been too difficult on one's own end, but collaborating, partnering with other people could make it very possible. Our first comment here is from Carrie. Why can't you take a pig to the ATM? They always pig out on the cash. Okay, I'll go along with that. Any other comments? Any people out there that like to say hello? Always glad to have you. Have Dave Snell right back. Hi, Dave. Just kind of got going. I know you're kind of frozen there for a while. Told everybody to hold on and
Yeah,
that you here, so you're here, and everybody's supremely happy to see you.
yeah,
Kerry
appreciate
told his first joke. You
appreciate you
betcha. I was
taking.
mentioning to the audience that the word of the day was basically collaboration. Kerry came back with a collaboration. I'll have to get my collaboration Legos to build on. Well, good for you, Kerry. Actually, my grandson's into Legos and has built some pretty significant things. He just finished that car that was in Ghostbusters
Oh yeah,
and did one of the space shuttles, which was pretty cool. A lot of little pieces. Takes a little bit of patience. So, Dave, why don't you introduce yourself a little bit to those who may not know you and your first thoughts on collaboration?
yeah. Thanks, Don. I apologize for a delay. I just had some internet issues there. I'm Dave Snell. I'm a security consultant who's done 20 years in the Navy, cybersecurity for the last 8 or 9 years, plus gotten into some private investigations and intelligence work based on my experiences in the Navy. And I always appreciate time here with Don because we always get into some interesting discussions and just the very fact that we're doing this is a good collaboration, if you will. I don't want to put any puns and plays on words here, but at the same time, collaboration, having lived in the military world for 20 plus years of my life and, working remotely and having to work with people of different skill sets, different experiences, backgrounds, understandings of the problems that we're facing, collaboration is the key element that makes sure that a process works or a program is going to be successful. And if you're not willing to put ego aside, you can't collaborate very well and you can't move forward. And ultimately, that's our goal. We don't want to be stagnant. We don't want to go in reverse. So if you want to move forward, you're going to have to work together with other people. And collaboration is the key word that comes to mind.
Yeah, that's so true because in today's world, it's never been easier to collaborate. If it wasn't for Restream or Zoom, uh, a conversation like this wouldn't be possible. And the ability to reach beyond your geography and your physical presence would be a challenge. So, by being able, and then if you take that to LinkedIn, you've got a billion people registered. So, you've got a pretty good selection of prospects who might be interested in what you're doing. And that's why really refining and defining it in a niche way will pre filter a lot of irrelevant, less aligned individuals that you don't have to kind of qualify and take a lot of time removing in time or not working as closely as you can. And, collaboration is something that happens sometimes in the moment, until a project shows up and you say, well, I need a skill set that I'm not very strong at, or I need a mentor or whatever, a client. This is an opportunity to really be known before you're needed. And I think that's important, is get the word out, plant the seeds. It's like anything else, even traditionally, it's too late to network when you need something,
Right.
because you're going to come across as needy. If you say, I'm planning on transitioning from my job next year, well, you got a whole year to let people know that. And they know that you have choices. When people see an individual and says, well, they're desperate, they'll take anything, usually they'll get offered anything and they'll probably accept anything. And everybody's starting in a really unequal footing, but opportunistic situation. So, it's so interesting, like David says, is you pick a word and by itself, it just stands alone as a word. When you start attaching memories, thoughts, visions of what could be, that word kind of pops up and comes alive. Let me see, we got another comment. Good morning, gentlemen. Interested to see you two from this side. Good morning to the entire community. Have to run. I think it's probably Jason Gerardo, who's usually with us on Wednesdays with Dave, but we're kind of mixing it up a little bit. Jason was actually on Monday because Carl was out of town, actually going up to Vancouver. And Con is just about to leave Greece after about 6 or 8 weeks and has missed a rotation, but I've been in touch with him. And these are people in our cohort group. So for those people who aren't familiar, and our group is a stunning example of collaboration. And one of the best benefits of it is the knowledge share. I was talking with, Harvey Tuck, who does the franchise show, is making great strides. One funny thing I noticed yesterday on his show is I never kind of wore a hat before I did a show. Harvey picked up on it pretty quick and now uses that as his meme. Just yesterday, he has a QR code on his show that you can scan and have a symbol of his hat and register as a member of Harvey's Hat Society and show it on your website. So it's fascinating. Go ahead, Dave.
I was going to say Harvey's a character. And I love hearing everything he has to say, and that he's been able to take this into a new direction is just phenomenal to watch.
Oh, for sure. And that's the benefit, is everybody in the group is doing something a little differently, expanding into areas that some of us may not be aware of or have an interest, but they're out there building the, opening the road, being a pathfinder, kind of a scout. And when they come out, then they can share and say, well, here's how I started, here's what it is. And it's much easier to get instruction from someone who's actually been in the field and has some experience and then can relay that to you. And naturally, what comes around goes around, and then everybody ratchets up together, which is the true benefit of collaboration, is growing as 15% or 20% of a group instead of being the 100% that you need to really focus on. What has been some of the most interesting collaborations you've experienced in your life, Dave?
Well, I'll start off with first, as you were talking, it reminded me just yesterday, I had a great story where last week, a guy I hadn't talked to in almost 20 years, we're shipmates back at the National Security Agency, and a few overlaps where we'd share notes here on LinkedIn from time to time, but we finally decided, hey, what are we doing? Let's get on a phone call. Mm-hmm. And he jumped right in with, well, what are you doing? What is your business? What are you trying to accomplish? And I told him, hey, I've got some ideas here. And he said, hey, I'm going to hook you up with this guy, and I'm going to hook you up with that guy, and I'm going to do whatever I can to help you. And I was like, well, well, Terry, I haven't seen you in a while. Well, what's the thing? He goes, I just like to help people. And to your point, it's building each other up. And I will, he said, look, I've got something you can help me with. Let's work together on this. Within 2 hours of that phone call, that Zoom meeting, chat or Google Meet, whatever it was, I'm on another call with the guy he recommended I talk to. And I've got another call this afternoon. Guy saying, look, here's the skill set you bring. These guys have experience and a skill set they need from you, and they can provide you. So why don't you guys collaborate? And Terry just kind of pushed us in the right path. And hopefully whether this comes into, hey, we're going to go make $1 billion, or we just have a couple of nice phone calls and say, hey, how can we help each other? Just like, as you point out, or someone's pointed out before for you, is you've got the Don Cohen Consulting. How can you help other people collaborate with others and move that? As I said in the very beginning, how do we move forward together or individually with a little tidbit from others? And I've got countless number of other collaboration stories where I give you primary is I was asked to be the military deception officer for the entirety of the Pacific. I was at Special Operations Command, but Pacific Command didn't have a MILDEC officer. Well, I don't know anything about MILDEC. I know what it is, and I've heard of D-Day deceptions. And okay, well, now I've got to start reaching out across the country. I'm in Hawaii. The guys back here in D.C. and Fort Meade and down in Tampa, guys who know how to do these things. Okay, hey, let's have a meeting. We're going to on a Zoom call before it was Zoom. This is 15 years ago. Okay, let's have a meeting. We're all going to meet somewhere and we're going to chat. And we're going to come up with a plan for how we're going to do this operation in the Pacific. Okay, and we developed and designed over probably a 6 month to a year process of here's our plan. And now, Dave Snell, go brief it to the Admiral. Well, this isn't my plan, guys. Well, you're the one who put it all together, so you're going to go do it. Okay, I'll do it. And I took a little ego with it. Don't get me wrong. But I couldn't have done that on my own. I mean, half the books you see behind me here, this big one right here is called The Deceivers. I read that to understand the history and learning from other guys who've done it real time. I flew to Afghanistan for 4 months to see what executions were going on so I could understand real time processes, people, ideas. It wasn't just me. It was a team effort, and that was the key to making it work. Now, I will say that the guy who followed me in that command kind of ruined it and didn't follow up with it, and it died on the vine, which was a little ego killing, but it was a successful collaboration and a process that moved the ball forward for the nation, I thought.
Yeah, that's interesting, and I think so valuable, because what I was able to appreciate from it is in the past, usually you get into something and then you need some help.
Yep.
Right? Maybe your garbage disposal stops working, you need a plumber. Yep. Right? That's a collaboration, because to get the job working right or get the job done, you bring in an expert, hopefully, or someone with at least a lot more experience than you do, and that builds confidence. Right? If you get a great player coming on the team, all of a sudden your whole viewpoint of the team, your chance of winning changes. But I think more importantly is the learning aspect through collaboration, not just the doing, because you got to learn to do. Sometimes you got to do and you learn, but those are usually expensive lessons when you're playing with live ammo or you're trying to fix a car when it's running. Versus reading a book like you mentioned, talking to people, reserving judgment. And through collaboration, you don't come up with the answer and share it. You come up with the problem and discuss it, try to solve it. And the beauty of that part is everybody has a vested interest because they participated. It's not really a collaboration when you say, okay, here's the job, here's what you do, here's how you do it, and here's who you report to. Well, that's just taking a direction instead of taking ownership of it. And then usually with collaboration, comes responsibility and accountability, right? It's like, hey, you're going to watch something for 4 hours and get relieved, and someone will watch it. During that 4 hours, it's your baby. How things work out are either a credit to you or a debit to you. And that's part of it, more the structural part. The intangibles are even more important, which is how generous are you with others? How do you share? How do you appreciate? How do you recognize? These are all things that will attract people, but more importantly, retain them and hopefully harness a lot more power of thought and action on their part if they feel like they truly belong, if they feel like they're truly being recognized and appreciated, and if personally and professionally they see themselves growing.
Yeah.
Sometimes you do projects and you say, well, didn't make much, but geez, I've learned a hell of a lot. I'm a lot better for it. So maybe I paid for some self-education, but now I can take that and get dividends for a long time. So I think with collaboration also comes timing. Is it short term? Is it long term? Do you need help for a day? Do you need help for a lifetime? How do you view opportunities that you are interested in or have an interest in you to determine, would this be a good collaboration?
I have to go back to, it's kind of a personal mission statement, if you will. I mean, I have my own business where I have a couple of lines of effort that I have between cybersecurity, intelligence, and private investigation. And if a collaboration isn't going to further my ability to do one of those three things in my professional life, then it's probably not something that beyond a, hey, how can I help you in the short term? How can we work together a little bit? I'm not taking anything out of it from a professional side. Inversely, I always recognize that, look, I may not have the right answer, and I'm going to help you out because I've been in your shoes. I've been where you are, where you don't know the right answers. I've had to do that numerous times through my career where I recognize that when I left Hawaii, one of the reasons we left Hawaii, everybody looks at me like, why'd you leave Hawaii? That's just, gorgeous life. And it was, don't get me wrong. But I recognized that there was a lot of people out there who were just going through the motions. Okay, well, why did you do this that way? Well, I'm not here to be criticized. I'm here to help you. Let me tell you why I did it my way. You take it and you run the way you need to. Well, but you did this for 4 years. This is your baby. I'm like, to your point earlier, you got to take some responsibility for it. In the military, we change commands every 2-4 years. Well, with that goes the responsibility. I'm not responsible for it after, I've turned the baton over to you. And it became very frustrating to say, look, I've helped you where I can. You need to roll with it. And I found in the program that I developed, it was, why'd you do that? Why'd you do? Well, guys, it's yours now. I've given you the information. Move on, please. Let me grow where I can too. But personally, I will collaborate with anybody if it means one of us or both of us will have some sort of benefit out of it. Professionally, personally, familial, whatever it is. There's always something that can be gained, whether it's a sense of fulfillment that I've passed on something and they can use it, or they've helped me and themselves to something that moves us both forward.
Well, that's really cool.
Hawaii story, but it was one on my mind. So
you are very relevant and efficient in the way you address things. And I think it's part of maybe a problem solving ability or getting right to the point when possible. And there's balance to everything we're talking about. And one thing that comes clearly to me is intention, right? And in corporate America, it's the same way. If you're going to get paid significantly for a bonus based on a performance, you may not be thinking long term. You probably aren't. You're thinking, what do I need to do in this space of time to win that prize? And that doesn't always help the team, because some people may have different incentives or benefits. And, when a person becomes selfish and not being sharing oriented, it starts to separate. People start to go their own way and they start helping each other within the group when they should actually be leaving the group and helping themselves. And in essence, they're kind of riding on the shoulders of everybody else, and people get to know it. And also, this isn't a fair and pure world all the time. Corporate America, even government agencies, don't always work for a lot of the benefit, because there is politics involved, there's bureaucracy involved, there's rank involved. Not everybody's equal. Some people advise and some people consent, and some people are going to do what they're going to do, whatever the group says. They're hoping the group can justify it because now they justify it. I know in business, a lot of timid, scared executives would bring consultants in. So they would say, well, this is what ABC Group recommended.
Yeah.
Even though it's what they wanted, but now they got a shield to say, well, I paid good money to a good company and they came up with, I thought, a good plan. It didn't work. They're at fault. So there's a part of defense that goes into collaboration and a part of offense.
Yeah.
And I do think leadership is the key. Who makes sure things stay honest? Who makes sure that when someone gets out of line, they get pushed back into their lane? And what's your thoughts? So you were in the military for 20 plus years. How did you enter and how did you leave? So what were you when you started, and what rank did you have when you left?
I went through the ROTC program at Georgia Tech. I came in as an ensign. I originally went to surface warfare, where I drove ships for 3 years off and on. I call it 3 years, but 6 months of that plus probably was schooling before I got to my ship. So I think I was on my first ship for about 2.5 years, went to cryptology, back to surface warfare, finished in cryptology. So I did 15 years as a cryptologist, approximately 5 as a surface warfare officer. And I retired as a lieutenant commander. And at some point I recognized that, hey, this is my career. There's certain certain wickets you need to meet to make your commander rank and captain rank and admiral, whatever. And I finally at some point said, look, I don't want to go back to sea. I'm starting a new family. I just want to stay here in Hawaii. And I want to go do this path. And it took me off my promotion path. So I retired as a lieutenant commander in 2004, out of here in Norfolk, Virginia area, Little Creek base. And, you bring up leadership, and it drives to accountability, responsibility. And we're taught from the very beginning that you can, I think it's delegate accountability, but you cannot delegate responsibility. I always mix this up, and I think I've got it right here. No matter what, you can delegate I've got it backwards. You're responsible for getting it done, but the guy above is the one who's accountable. I'm making you responsible for taking this action, getting this done, so I can make the bigger mission. And everybody has their own responsibility. You cannot delegate accountability. I think that's what it is. And ultimately, if something went wrong, I didn't go, well, Don didn't do that part, so it all failed. No, it falls right here. And that's a military axiom that, the captain of a ship is responsible for everything that happens under a ship, under his command. From the day he says, I relieve you, sir, to the point where he says, I stand relieved, that window is his or hers. I don't want to be sexist here, just it's theirs. And whether they have control over whether a sailor drove drunk off base, it's still he's accountable for that. He's responsible for it. And we've seen many a leader be fired for it. The Navy in the last 2-3 years has had dozens of firings for something that was out of their control. Don't get me wrong, there's lots of guys who are doing stupid stuff too, and they're going to get appropriately fired. But let's say, for example, the collisions at sea we had 5-10 years ago, the McCain and the Fitzgerald in the Pacific. One of the times the captain was asleep. He was relieved. He was accountable for everything that happened, whether he was on the bridge or not. Leadership is setting the tone for making sure that collaboration can happen effectively, that you have a culture that allows for collaboration and cross-functional discussions inside and outside of your immediate command, or I forgot what the corporate world, department or division would be. Because if you don't have that, you don't have collaboration, and you don't have a good ability to move forward and to make things positive for your crew, for your subordinates, for the bigger organization that you belong to. Because no matter what we say, even as an LLC, I have responsibilities to other people, my clients, to the government, because I have to pay the taxes, so I need to make them happy. There's always something external to ourselves that we need to relate to understand a relationship with which we have. It's very, very tough to say, I'm going to drive this ship and I'm going to do it all by myself. Well, I've got engineers I need to talk to. I've got guys who are monitoring radars and communications. I'm just one little piece, and I have to be able to communicate with them. And communication is something that often is lacking. And if you look at any accident that happens, whether it's in an airplane or in a ship, a lot of it's because of lack of communication. Somebody didn't tell somebody soon enough. They saw something was going to happen or could happen, so a decision could be made. And that collaboration is really incumbent upon good communication. So
yeah, I agree with you
again,
100.
Sorry.
I think he makes. No, I'm sorry, I interrupted.
No,
but
no,
when you're no, I take responsibility and accountability, and I think that's the mature way to go, because every business I had, I took full responsibility for anything that took place in it. I had stores all over the country at one point, and you can't be in two places at the right time. You have to depend on managers and supervisors. But I took responsibility because, first of all, it was easy, because you can assume responsibility, no one's going to fight you on it. The second thing is it makes it easy for other people to have shared responsibility. So, and when I stepped forward, it was easy for everybody else. And I felt it truly, because if someone screwed up, I ultimately was responsible for hiring them. I was responsible for training them. I was responsible, to your point, communicating with them. And if something went wrong, I missed something, even though it could have been something like someone woke up one day with crazy ideas, did something crazy, and had no relationship to anything prior or forward. But it's a lot easier when you put that aside and say it's not really whose fault it is. What do we learn from this? Or how do we make sure this never happens again? And then how do we communicate it to, let's say, other ships, right? The good thing about what they're doing with self-driving cars is, when I started to understand that if you get in an accident, God forbid, with someone else, it's only two people involved, right? And you'll learn, hey, I'm never going to make that turn again. And somebody may learn, I may not want to go through a stop sign again. But with automated driving, everything that one car learns shares with the whole system. And all of a sudden, a million cars can get reprogrammed to take advantage of a new experience, to save future cars and people in it from having that same experience. And the other thing is you lose some of your ego when you assume responsibility in ways that you could justify not being responsible. But then you get into the pointing back and forth And then people are justifying things that really may not be justifiable, but they're in defense of themselves. And why put someone on defense all the time? Because that fear will mitigate initiative,
Yeah.
right? If I'm going to stick my neck out and I have no upside and a lot of downside, well, I'm not going to do it, even though I know it's the right thing to do. And if it doesn't get done, it'll probably have a negative impact. But hey, my fingerprints weren't on any of that stuff. Versus the ability to be a little bit more thoughtful, have a little grace. And again, it depends on the situation. Some things you just can't brush aside, especially when it's has to do with mismanagement, poor actions taken. I mean, if someone's drunk on the job, it's going to be hard to justify giving that person more responsibility in the future. And at the same time, if you found yourself in the same situation other people are finding themselves in, it's understandable. And really the key is not what did you do, but what did you do when you found out you didn't do well? Was there a cover up? What was there denial or even hiding? I mean, how many people put something away and they hope no one ever sees it, but it's too late when they do, because you're kind of caught with, I can forgive something that was accidental or non-intentional. And I think in your line of work, private investigation, you have people who are doing things that are nefarious and don't want people to know about it. And I think most of the time people are more upset with the betrayal than the action.
Yeah.
In other words, and that happens in business all the time, especially at a higher level, is like, when did you know about it and when did you report it?
Yeah.
Right. And if I found out today, and I used to always see that as an opportunity, is get out front in something, especially if you know it's coming out. Be the first one to broadcast it, because at least, hey, as soon as I knew, I told you, versus, hey, you've been doing this for 3 years and you never told me about it, and you've been living a double life. Yeah. I mean, that's a trust that's hard to win back. And I think when people aren't afraid of taking little hits, they avoid taking bigger hits. How many times could something been taken? I mean, I know that if you drive through a express lane, right, and you get like a $10 ticket in the mail or something, in 60 days, that turns into $50. In 180 days, it turns into $100. And at a certain point, you say, geez, I'm paying 10 times what I had to pay. And some people brush it aside and think, hey, it's nothing. And that's an easy example, because $10 to $100 is not life-changing. But relationships, especially collaboration, is all based on integrity. Trust is the hardest thing to build and the easiest thing to lose. It only takes one sentence and you're wiped off. Say the wrong thing at the wrong time to the wrong person, and you've been excluded. And I think the people who are more thoughtful, more gracious, and the people who give something time to take care of itself. Sometimes if you stop the action when it's at the worst point, everybody is going to have that projection on them. But if someone got into a deep hole, dug themselves out, and came out on the other end the right way, well, that's when you report it, right? You don't report a suspicion. You could if it's significant enough, but usually you'll go follow it through on your own to make sure it's real. And then you'll have something to say. I noticed this, didn't exactly know what it was, followed it up, checked it out, talked to a few people. Boy, we got an issue.
I think you're hitting directly onto leadership and culture. And, and it does tie to accountability and responsibility, because if you don't have a culture, if you don't have a leader who allows a culture to allow for mistakes or errors of some kind, to say, hey, boss, I have a problem. Because if you're a screamer for example, and everything is a fight. And I've had numerous bosses where, hey, boss, just a good example. I had a story with an old shipmate just a month ago. He told me he had to take a message to the skipper of our ship. Now, this is 26 years ago, 25 years ago. And the skipper said, dang it, Weps, why is this always broken? Look, boss, I'm just the guy here to tell you that if you don't sign this message, it's never going to get fixed because we have to tell somebody. I can't tell anybody that we're broken again. Gosh darn it, gosh, and just practically throwing things in his office. And my buddy just said, Captain, okay, then it won't get fixed and I'll just leave your office. And he just walked out of his cabin. The captain just irate. And he said, well, but the point is, if you're going to have that type of mentality that everything is a struggle, everything is a fight, everything is going to make you angry, that it's not going your way, you're never going to collaborate. You're never going to get the truth, because people will start hiding facts from your day-to-day routine. They're not going to tell you, hey, the emperor's not wearing any clothes, because they're going to get yelled at. So we have to have a good leadership, culture that says, look, I'm going to give you some leeway. I'm going to give you some rope. I don't want to say to hang yourself. I want to give you some which point I'm going to pull you back. You've gone too far. But if you don't know those left-right limits, you can't push them, A. And the leader can't come back with, well, you shouldn't have done that. Well, let's communicate on what my left-right limits really are. Because if I don't know that, I'm going to go do what I have to get it done within those of the law. And that just drives, if you don't have a good communication system to understand what it is that you can get away with, and I don't want to say that nefariously, but that the leader will not be upset with you, you're never going to get anything done. And it's really a big problem with this culture of lack of decision making. You bring up, I'm going to hire somebody to give me the answer so I can then go, well, it didn't work out, it's their fault. No, you're the leader. Take the input and then you make the decision. Because as soon as you say, we're going to take that person or that team's collaborative answer and we're going to execute it, you've assumed responsibility and accountability. It's your decision because you're in a position of authority. I can't then go back and say, well, Don and his team and his collaboration group said this was the right path. No. We collaborated, but there's always got to be somebody who's on the hook, somebody who's going to make a decision to say, this is the right answer. And if you're not willing to do that, and so many people, military and civilian, corporate, I've seen in my consulting work and to a degree in my private investigation work, where people just don't want to make a decision. They're like, well, that's too much money. That might get me in trouble. I can't tell the boss that. Well, then you're not in a really good environment where you can be expecting something positive.
Well, I think you make, again, some excellent points, and you really weave the response in a way that gives everybody some easy opportunities to level up with the conversation, and, being in the Navy and dealing with the Navy, it reminds me of two leadership movies that I was always fascinated by. One was the Caine Mutiny. I don't know if you ever saw that one, and that was a leader. It was a great movie. Humphrey Bogart, Fred McMurray, who had such a tight rein on the ship and then started to lose it because of strawberries, right? So he was eating too many strawberries and he had to get to the bottom of the whole strawberry element, and you see him losing it on the stand in time. But that was a culture and an environment of fear. And eventually the shipmates took over the ship.
Yeah.
And you go one step back as you go to Mutiny on the Bounty.
Yeah.
Right. And there was another story of a captain who was just a bad person in so many ways, treated people so unfairly based on his position. If he was just an an equal player, none of that would have ever taken place. And because you have ownership or you have responsibility that's given to you, it's abuse and use.
Yeah.
You know, and it's a key to understand what is everybody thinking, but more importantly, what is everybody feeling? And a quality leader is out there in the trenches, is out there on the front line with everybody. You know, they said Napoleon was considered the 10,000 man soldier. And what that meant is as soon as he showed up on the battlefield and led the charge, it was worth 10,000 more men with just the motivation and morale boost that he would bring, because people will follow you anywhere if you're worth following.
Yeah.
You know, that whole saying of do as I say, not as I do rings pretty true, right? You can't expect people to go into battle and you're running away from it or staying far enough away from it that, you know, you have more to gain than anybody else and less to lose. And that's not a very good bet for people around you. So I think that's a matter of having the courage. And courage is important in leadership because sometimes you got to swallow your pride. Sometimes you got to embarrass yourself in front of people. But you're not really doing anything that they're not aware of already, right? And
I will just counter real quick is I would recommend to anybody that wants to see, you know, take the flip side of what you just mentioned, 2 bad leaders, and take a flip side. This is going to be the most contrarian leadership movie that I will ever recommend, but I think it has the most value, is Down Periscope. And it's a cheesy comedy with, God, I just forgot his name, Fraser Crane actor, where you take a bad situation, this captain who's not following the path like I didn't, you know, kind of mentality, who's given an old diesel boat that's Rust Bucket from World War II to go fight against these nuclear navy, and it's a battle between, and you bring up bureaucracy of 2 admirals who are fighting against each other for the next rank, essentially. And Fraser Crane character, Tom Dodge is his character name in the movie, is given the worst people in the Navy you could ever think of. The first female on a submarine in a movie that I can think of. And he takes them through, hey, look, we're going to clean up this ship. We're going to take her out to sea. We're going to test her out. And then we're going to push her limits. But what did he also do? He was given a task. And his admiral that was on his side, who gave him the command, said, look, go be a pirate. Do the worst thing. You've got no limits. Just make it happen. And this other to bound him into this war game of you can't do anything left or right of this. And he identified the skills of his people. And one guy who was the sonar man who could imitate, you know, whale noises and dolphin noises was in a critical condition. Hey, I will have that guy make some noises. Well, the enemy submarine doesn't think it's a submarine that he's after. Just one example. But it was a good leadership way of saying, okay, look, I know my people. I know where they can work together and how they work together so we can get to the mission accomplishment of winning the war game based on the good admiral's directive and intention. So I love the Caine Mutiny. I had to write a paper and then give a presentation of my leadership course at Tech and the ROTC program. And I think I wanted to do Mr. Roberts, another bad CO example in the SHU Navy, as we call it, the Surface Warfare Navy. But I got assigned the Caine Mutiny. So I've followed the Caine Mutiny since I was a kid. And I tell you what, just an aside, for anybody who wants to watch that movie, great. I applaud it. I highly recommend anybody read the book. And on my first ship, we had a skipper who took over 3 or 4 days before we got underway for a war game off the East Coast here. And I had just started reading it about a week or 2 before he came on board. And I said, oh, this is a great book. I'm not a fast reader at the time, so I've just kind of taken my time, and we're working 18-hour days as it is. And there's a scene in the book that I don't think is in the movie where the main character, Willie, comes down to the wardroom before he's about to go on a mid-watch, midnight to 4 a.m., and he sees the captain in there eating a soup by himself. And I kid you not, I walked into the wardroom on my way to engineering before going to the bridge, and there's my captain eating soup by himself. It was just like, all right, that book came out in 1948. This is 1996. Something's not right. So I mean, there's parallels through history, and that book is a very good explanation of what it was to be a surface warfare officer, ship driver in the U.S. Navy back in World War II. And it gives so many political, leadership, bureaucracy, personality lessons through life that to this day, my good friend down in Tampa and we always go back to, what did we learn from the Caine Mutiny that we saw in real life? And we see it all the time.
Yeah, no, that's so cool, because sometimes art imitates life and life imitates art.
Yeah.
And sometimes there's a very small opaque element between the two. But I think that's also one of the benefits of reading, learning. Now with YouTubing, you can get Googling, you can get so much more information at your fingertips that you're only limited by your curiosity, not by the wealth of information out there. So how you structure a question will determine what kind of answers you get. And then, Think and Grow Rich, which is considered one of the most important books of the most successful people. There was a saying, you want to know who someone is, ask them what they're reading, and you'll find out who they are, right? If they're reading comic books versus reading classics or something else. And there's no excuse for not knowing. Before, money made a bigger difference. If you couldn't go to college, you were at a disadvantage over someone who did. If you didn't have access to an encyclopedia, if you lived too far from a library. So physical location, personal or family situation could determine the difference between someone who advanced and someone who fell behind. No one has that excuse. I actually walked into a library for the first time in a long time, and I was amazed at how digital it all was.
Yeah.
Everybody had screens. Everybody had, there weren't as many books as there were tapes, audios, videos that you could rent out. And, I thought libraries would be archaic after a while because you didn't have Audible back then. You didn't have books on tape that you could download. But I think having things that are more democratic in a sense, where everybody has the same access to them, is important. But mentorship and leadership is so important to collaboration, because some people need a boost. That's why you go into training. They don't just say, hey, you got a lot of attributes and ability, here's what you do, because it's a responsibility and accountability of a leader to make sure, did you train them well enough? Did you test them on what you did? Did you have some trial efforts before you turn something over? Because sometimes the lowest person on the totem pole could create the most havoc, right? Forgetting to turn something off, forgetting that you left something on the burner, something that was just, it happens. But especially when you're in a house with 40 people, when that happens. And there's a difference between personal responsibility, because, hey, if you do something to yourself, it's yourself and you. And it's still not a positive. But if you were in charge of, let's say, a whole house of people, maybe an apartment building, you got to be a little bit more thoughtful, because the risk may not be that great, but when something bad happens, the result is awful. And to your earlier point, even though it's not always right, someone's got to take the hit.
Yeah.
Someone's got to go. I mean, if something terrible happens, rarely do you say, everybody meant well, everybody tried their best, it was beyond their control. No, people want a name. They want someone to blame, and maybe more than one. And what that does, in some ways, it instills confidence in others that, hey, there's a fairness here. And I think the bigger thing, or one of the big things, is really everybody feeling like that's what I expected. So not having a surprise. If you do something really dumb, you can probably expect, do something crazy driving, you're going to lose your license. Do something crazy, you're probably going to jail.
Yeah.
It's only when someone does something and someone doesn't get what's expected that the person who did feels this was totally unfair. And their faith and respect for the institution or for the organization or for their chain of command goes way down. And you don't know that. And some people have to be talked to just for understanding, not so much that it's going to change what happened, but just understand, what were you thinking? Why did you do this? And not in an accusing way, because that'll turn people. I mean, everything is a nuance. Everything is a facet. It's like having the key that opens the door. You got to decide, which key am I going to use here? If I come in hot and heavy, I'm just going to blow the place up and turn everybody off. If I go in like a lamb, no one's going to respect me, and everybody's going to know that's the limit. And you get tested, right? As a commander or as a leader, people will push you, and they'll do little things to see what your response is. And if you slowly keep backing up, people will start grabbing more space and more authority. And then all of a sudden, you got a zoo instead of an organization. You got everybody doing whatever they want to do, and you lose respect. So it's precedent. It's not what can I deal with, but what is it going to affect the whole group? Because, if you're dealing one-on-one, you can be far more forgiving if it's just you and them. If you're representing an organization or you're part of 5 people, well, you've got to be thoughtful of other 5 people, the organization, and sometimes it's not about you, and it should never be taken about you. It's, there's so many times in my life, and especially in business, I had to do things that were totally adverse to my feelings and thinking. But I had a job to do, and I had to do it. And it wasn't because I'd get hurt if I didn't do it, but hey, a good player takes the responsibility and just does it and has some trust in leadership or whoever made this decision or whoever put you in charge to say, I think they probably know more than I do about it, go ahead, Dave.
Oh, sorry. I was just stretching a little bit there, but I think your point is spot on. We've got to leave ego at the door when it comes to collaboration. Sometimes it's not going to be our best interest. It's almost like a politician that we've lost. And I'm not going to get into left, right, center politics, but politics, just like collaboration, is about finding the common good and where I have to give and I have to take a little bit so that we can get to where we need to be. I'm not always going to get what I want in this instant, but in the next instance, maybe I am. In the following instance, maybe I give up a little, but this time I take a little. And there's going to be a balance that, again, we have to have a common goal or mission, which is the betterment of the government, the betterment of the people, the betterment of an organization, of whatever the collaboration is trying to achieve. And if you have to give a little and I have to take a little, are we getting to where we need to be? That might be what we got to do. But we leave our ego at the door. And if you're going to be a take, and this is all about me, that's not collaboration. That's just you taking a lead and saying dictatorially, I'm going to do it my way. That's not collaboration at all.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there. And I think one thing I learned, again, is who was responsible in the first place. I mean, I did quite a few turnarounds. where I'd have to go into companies that may have been great at one time, but fell upon hard times or didn't change fast enough or got too bloated with too many people and too much expense. And I know one time I had 2 weeks to terminate 70 people out of 100. And I had to do it in groups at a certain point.
Yeah.
And take 7, 8 people in a room and say, well, and Fridays were the worst day because Fridays is when the hammer would come down and people would be relieved if they made the cut on Friday, and they'd see people packing up their desk, people crying, and I had nothing to do with the company until I was brought into it to kind of clean it up. It was kind of somebody who decided, hey, it's better to amputate a leg than see the whole body die, and put it back on solid ground and give it a future. And it was just heartbreaking. I had women say, I just had a baby a month ago and there's no way I'm going to be able to take care of it. I just bought a house 6 weeks ago. And I couldn't feel any more for them. But at the same time, I was brought in after the fact. I had never hired these people. I had never been responsible, but I still felt it. But at the end of the day, I had a job to do. And the job was taking care of what I had to do. And it was hard coming home every night from those situations, knowing I'm going back for another round and another round.
Yeah.
And, the philosophy was always cut deeper and faster than you would think. What they used to say was the worst philosophy was the salami philosophy, which is one slice at a time. And it's, geez, just get it over with, right? If you got to get rid of 70 people, get them out of here. The sooner, the better. And allow the 30 people to now say everything is safe. Everybody's got their job. What was so interesting, and I did quite a few of those because I had a partner that had a lot of companies that needed a lot of help in some ways, is that being able to tell people that, hey, I'm here. I don't have any control over what's going to happen. If it wasn't me, it's going to be somebody else. Not to say I'm not the bad guy, but just to say I'm doing my job. I also, in the back of my thought, well, why did the 30 people survive, another 70 didn't? Well, probably there was a factor that these people worked a little harder, came in a little earlier, stayed a little later, stood up for the company when it was having issues. While the other ones, how did you take any extra classes? Did you try to get a promotion? Did you, or were you just happy with the status quo? And it just made me think, I don't want to be one of those 71 day, I want to make sure that I put in more than I take. I'm a better person than a lot of people around me. And a lot of times, people say, well, you're not getting paid any extra for staying longer. And I hated the situation where you're in companies that no one want to be the first to leave. Yeah. And everybody's done with their work 2 hours ago, but they're just sitting here waiting for someone else to break the glass. And I thought that was so ridiculous. The other thing now is, with remote work and, people having side gigs, you don't have to be dependent on the traditional, on the old. And, if you want something, create it. Don't work for people if you're not that kind of person. If you're always a little more ambitious than the company allows you to be, if you're a little bit more of a risk taker than the company allows you to be, eventually they're going to change you into what you don't want to be over time, because it happens gradually. You give up a little self-respect here, you give up a little bit there. It's like that, whole thing with how do you boil a frog, right? And the story basically is, if you drop a frog in boiling water, it'll jump out. If you put a frog in lukewarm water and you put up the heat, it won't even know how hot it's getting, and eventually that'll be the end of it. So I think these talks are so important, not only for what we have to say to others, but what we're talking about with each other. I mean, the Cain Mutiny would have never come up in my day if it wasn't for this conversation. little that you agree with, you file from what everybody else says. And it's amazing the magic that it pops up in another situation. And eventually you're the factor of all the people you've had interactions with who have an influence on you, whether it's family, friends, colleagues. And it's really being able to pick and choose the best. So final words, we hit 1 minute, 1 hour, these things. I mean, we could have a marathon and never run out of ideas because it's always like a trapeze act where you toss yourself to somebody and they toss you back to somebody else. And really, you just got to go with the flow. So, Dave.
Well, two thoughts come to mind. First, just off what you just said, is maybe we should start at 8 a.m. on Central or Mountain Time one day and just go, or you hand off to me to hand off to Kelly to hand off to Jason, and the three of us just kind of, or between the 5 or 10 of us in the groups, just kind of hand off and we just play this and see how far it goes. To your last point, as far as chopping off the whole leg, to save the body, vice the salami thing. And I don't want to take up too much time, but it reminded me of the Japanese methodology. Is if a company starts to go down in business, earnings and revenue share, whatever it is, the first person to take the hit, financially especially, is the CEO. He takes a pay cut. And if that doesn't solve the problems, then he goes before anybody is released at the lower level. And I think that's just a shift in accountability, responsibility thing that we're talking about. It's not the fault of the workers if they're putting in what we're asking. It's something leadership-wise that is failing. And again, I'll finish off with collaboration is a leadership issue. It's a teamwork issue. It's a responsibility, accountability issue, and how we can move together in a forward manner so that we can accomplish the goal that's set ahead of us, whether it's a personal goal, a business goal, or an organizational, institutional, political goal. If you don't have collaboration, you don't have some sort of ability to work with, give and take with each other, there's no movement forward. And I'll just leave it at that to sum up quickly.
I know, I think that's wonderful. And you do a tremendous job of putting it together in a way that's easily understood and hopefully being able to be applied. And I do agree that the top is more responsible than it usually takes. They're usually the last ones to go to court. They're the ones with all the money and the lawyers, and the little guys can't afford it, don't know any better, and they get shuffled off. But things are changing. I think everything is starting to move bottom up because people are coming together. I mean, I just noticed, again, without being political, you're having Zoom calls with 190,000 people showing up. And up until last week, Zoom never had a call over 100,000.
Yeah.
And, it's really about time efficiency, is how many people can you get on a call with one person being able to share, or a bunch of people. And I think your point is well taken on our group. Be great in time to have where all of us come together, maybe for an event. It could be an afternoon event or a weekend event or something, where now we get to showcase each other, what we're doing, how we're doing it, because it's a lot easier when you're given benefit and getting something in return. It doesn't have to be financial. It could be just more connections, more audience. I know we talked earlier, you've got a friend who's doing something. I've got a friend who's doing the same thing. That's where collaboration really has value, is when referrals come in based on the ability to build new partnerships, not just relationships. Here's a client for you, but hey, here's someone doing what you're doing. Maybe together you could do better, or at least be aware. So with that said, we went a little bit over. Hopefully it was more than justified. I certainly enjoyed it. And I can't wait to get back together with Dave tomorrow. Actually, we've got Jason Gerardo with Kelly, so that'll be a good show. And Dave will be back next week. So thank you all very much. Thank you, Dave.